are you listening to? Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn.
Welcome to another episode of Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. I'm Carolyn.
I'm Kim.
And we have a couple of guests tonight to talk about some different issues, but issues that are interconnected to a degree. Mm-hmm. So we will be talking to Clark Aposhian of the Utah Shooting Sports Council. That took me a moment. And about... most of us have seen some videos circulating.
Craziness.
And all of those crazy right-wingers who have for years been saying that the feds are coming for your guns may finally be proven correct, unfortunately.
Like every other crazy right-winger
conspiracy theory
and conspiracy that has come to life.
Yes. So we'll see how Utahns are protected from some of this potential federal overreach. And then we have a discussion with Senator Kirk Cullimore to talk about the state Supreme Court confirmation process.
Yeah. Because we've had a resignation or retirement, I guess.
Yes.
And so, Utah is now in the middle of its own replacement procedures.
Yes, and they've been dealing with that. So anyway, welcome, Clark. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, no problem. Glad to be here. Happy to talk about, anything firearm related, of course. But,
So what were you going to say something?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so as we mentioned, most of us have seen the video online that I think was in Delaware of the ATF agent or agents, and then I think local police who were, it seems, going door to door, but we saw them on Ring camera at a gentleman's home asking for his guns. They wanted to verify that the guns that they had a record of him purchasing were in the home. Because, there have been a lot of straw purchases and a lot of firearms-related violence. So they wanted to make sure that he was on the up and up and that they could identify and find those guns within his home. And then Missouri has said that a number of their counties have been asked by the FBI to produce records on the concealed carry permits in the within their counties. And their AG, I think, has said they passed a law just recently, a few years ago, that does not permit them to turn that information over to the federal government. So tell us what you're seeing and hearing out there, and what, if anything, Utah has in law that can protect us as citizens from some of this federal overreach. And if we don't have enough, what we're going to be doing about it.
Okay, so let's take the last one first on the concealed carry permits. Utah has, and for those of you that want to check it out, 535708 of the Utah Code restricts BCI from sharing that information on concealed carry permits on applicants who have been approved. Now, applicants who are denied because of a criminal history, they can actually share that. But, for the just shy of 1 million concealed carry permits in Utah, they are prohibited, both civilly and criminally prohibited, BCI, from giving that information. Also, anyone who would have access under a normal way, the law enforcement agencies who would have appropriate access to those records, only either by warrant or by investigation on a specific person, they are also prohibited from giving that information, from sharing it with the feds.
Oh, even if there's a warrant.
We're happy we have that. And a judge is going to have to review that, obviously, for a warrant. But we've had that for many years, 535708 of the code. And even as instructors cannot share that information of the people they taught, unless the people say, hey, it's okay, of people who've been given that information.
Okay, can I just say I had no idea that there are nearly 1 million in the state of Utah with a population of just over 3 million residents?
Wow.
Yeah, but now, what do we got? 3.5 million. About 2.5 million of those are able to get a permit. They're over. We have about 1 million under 18.
Right. That makes me wonder what portion of that is the adult population then to have 1 million. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
We lost audio real quick.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, you're back.
So over half Over half of those, though, are non-residents, not Utah residents that have those permits. Interestingly, because in the vast majority, probably the biggest single state is California that gets the Utah permit. Not because they can carry in California, but because they can't get a permit in their own home state yet. With the Bruin decision, that's around the corner. So, so we have that, and we do have protections. There have been protections against what I know you want to talk about, the ATF coming to the door. There was protections proposed as recently as 2013, 2014. Representative Brian Green, Representative Green. Now I forgot. Anyways, Green, fantastic legislator. He proposed that it would be illegal for a law enforcement officer of any entity, whether it be police or sheriff or state, to aid in the investigation for federal authorities regarding what they call unconstitutional firearm laws. But I need to probably explain the genesis behind what the ATF was doing at that person's house. Now, I don't know the exact reason, but I can tell you what they were going off of.
Okay.
And that.
Yeah.
So
give us some background.
Then it goes back as far as 1968. The Gun Control Act of 1968 required federal firearms licensed gun dealers, or FFLs, to report to the feds and local law enforcement anytime an individual came in and bought more than one long gun, a rifle or shotgun, at a time or within 5 days. They had to report. It's called an MSR, a multiple sales report. And that's what those ATF agents were going off of, because this individual sounds like he bought 2 guns and they were too long. Oh, by the way, handguns also have to be reported in the states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And do you know what's common about those? They all border Mexico, because they were concerned that people were buying handguns as well as long guns and getting them across the border. So they were buying them under what we call a straw purchase, or for somebody that cannot pass the background check.
And you're not allowed to do that if you are not the president and the Department of Justice, right? Yeah, exactly. Regular Americans can't do that.
Yeah, you're crossing into their territory if they want to, if they want to supply guns to the Mexican cartels, that's their business. We can't do that.
Okay, thanks for that clarity. Okay.
And you can hashtag Fast and Furious there. So that's literally what. So anyway, now I can't even remember the state.
I'm sorry. So you were talking about
Missouri.
What state was the ATF came to the person?
That was in Delaware, I think.
Delaware. Okay, so Delaware, they're completely out of the mix. The ATF got a note on their multiple sale report that this individual had purchased more than 2 firearms. So they went to his house under the guise of something very simple. They just wanted to see if he still had the firearms, and they were just going to verify with the serial number. So, which is very interesting, because I have actually a copy of the report of multiple sale. Now, this is something that has all the information that a dealer would keep in his or her records.
Okay.
When you fill out a 4473, a transfer form from a dealer to you, to an individual, you fill out your name, your address, the make, model, and serial number, the caliber, everything, all what we call the horsepower of that transaction. But that record stays in the filing cabinet or electronically in the dealer's possession. That information does not go anywhere else. It's not supposed to go to the feds, and there's certainly no database made of that.
So what are they comparing? What are they comparing this gentleman's?
They're comparing this form, which is form 114003, which is or 3310.4 form, which is the multiple sale form. They get all that information though on the guns that you purchased, and they do get to keep a database of it, which we had said a long time ago, that is no bueno. That we don't want the feds. They have no reason to have a database of all these guns. And so anyway, so they came armed with this paper, remember, they didn't have a warrant. You know why we know they didn't have a warrant? Because they asked to see the guns. They didn't just barge in. And so I kind of wonder, during a sale, at big box manufacturer, or even a local gun store sale, they'll sell 2 and 3 guns to an individual at a time. They're buying one for all the kids. This could be a .22 rifle, for goodness sakes. And they'd have to fill out this MSR and send a copy within 1 business day to local law enforcement as well as to the ATF. How many of those people are out there? There's got to be hundreds of thousands, if not, more. Is the ATF, should the ATF be now coordinating with local law enforcement, the sheriff in this case, which I'm very disappointed about, to go to each individual's home and ask to see the guns, to see if they still had them? And if they didn't have them, that individual could have just looked at the gun and said, this isn't what I want. I can't return the gun, so I'm just going to sell it to my neighbor. If he didn't have the gun, is that going to put him in jeopardy for private transaction of a firearm? Now, in Delaware, you can't do a private transaction, but in other states, you can. So anyway, that's the point. So one of the big troubling things is that they came to the person's house asking to see the serial numbers. And you do that when you have a badge on your chest and a gun on your hip and the big, the body armor, and then you're flanked by local law enforcement. That has the perception of, oh my gosh, I have to do this. Yeah. And they're right at my door. There's no phone calling saying, we want to come by. And, you don't have that. There's that exigency that says, oh, crud, I don't even have time to get an attorney or to ask questions in that. So, and you're automatically assumed.
Right. And so would this look like a law enforcement activity that would require a warrant, or does this look like a strict liability situation where the agency in a regulatory position or an administrative position can demand this? Because no, they would have to, even if they want to demand something, they're going to have to get a warrant. Okay.
But if they're asking, and the way they did it, they asked the individual. So if it happens to you, let's just, an otherwise law-abiding person, and you've run afoul of this multiple sale reporting, which is not your responsibility. You don't have to fill out anything when you buy 2 or 3 guns. It's the FFL that has to do that. And you don't have to sign anything on it or anything. But no, you basically say, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
Right.
Now, does that mean if they really have a bee in their bonnet, they're going to go get a warrant? And it's going to have to be a federal warrant, because unless your state has, a similar, likewise law, they're going to have to get a warrant for that. And at that point, step aside, let them in if they have that.
But that's kind of the rule on everything that shows up with a badge on it, right?
Well, yeah, because you may have 0 problems whatsoever, with the firearm. But what happens if you just, I don't know, your spouse took the gun out and went shooting with it right then? And then you're going to have that air of the perception of, oh my gosh, I don't have the gun now. I don't know. What if something happens to fall out of the officer's pocket and they pick it up and it's an illicit substance? Then you're automatically a prohibited person. Anyway, I'm just going, nothing good can come from this. And especially the way they were saying it on the video. Hey, this will be really quick. We're just going to take a quick look at the serial numbers and we're going to be on our way. They didn't say what would happen if the serial numbers didn't match, or if such and such, something happened, or you couldn't produce the guns. Then you're going to feel that need to start answering questions. Well, and everything you say to a federal agent, you make any mistakes, it's going to be counted as a lie, as far as I'm concerned. So now, let's say they do, you do go in there, you let them see it, or they have a warrant, and they decide they're going to take this gun for whatever reason, for whatever justification they find. Do not sign. You want to sign a receipt for it, yes, that they got it. But there's 2 forms that the ATF uses, and they tried to do this with me right downtown in the Salt Lake City ATF office. When I was I had to turn in my bump stock, my original one, in between court cases. And the judge said they can hold on to it, but they cannot destroy it. They cannot have it. It's still Clark Aposhian's bump stock, but you guys get to keep it in your storeroom and you cannot destroy it. They handed me a form, and it was for the destruction, for the taking and destruction of it. And I just happened to read it. In fact, my co-host on my radio show, Bill Pedersen, said, "Hey, wait a minute, that says this." And I got looking at this. I called my attorney real quick, and he says, "Oh, no. Do not, if you've written anything on that, rip it up into little pieces." Then they came out with the other form that said it was a holding or transitory type of thing. And but I almost signed away my bump stock. So.
Wow. And now that you bring up the bump stock, I think that is, well, I want to ask one other question first, and then I want to ask about your case before the Supreme Court. And so the other question is, are there additional measures that you are looking at talking to the legislature about taking in order to protect citizens of Utah against some of this federal overreach that we're starting to see, or at least concerns of federal overreach?
Well, you know what? We've had, yes. And so to answer your question, yes, definitely. I want to revive existing legislation that was never passed back. And we're going to go back 8-9 years to some of, let's see, I think Lee Perry had some. I think Brian Green had some. I think Senator Hinkins had some as well. And we're going to revive some of that does this, that basically says, hey, local Utah law enforcement, even though the feds can enforce state laws, I don't know if you knew that, the feds can enforce state laws. They are supposed to make every effort to work with local law enforcement, but that we're not to assist them in things that unconstitutional acts. Why would we want our own sheriff coming for a ride along, or local police department or state trooper helping an illegal act or a violation of the constitutional right of an individual, whether it be First Amendment, Second Amendment, whatever. And we want to prohibit that kind of behavior because, one, it puts our own state or that county or city certainly civilly liable. I think there'd certainly be things, and I think for even for that reason, we want to protect those.
Well, Clark, why don't you just work on taking it all the way, and let's make our Utah sheriffs constitutional sheriffs. I mean, that would be a dream anyway. Take that all the way.
I have Sheriff Labrum. I got to put in a plug for Sheriff Labrum. Uinta County is a fantastic sheriff. He was the very first sheriff to sign the Second Amendment sanctuary and make Uinta County the very first Second Amendment sanctuary in the state of all 29 counties. And I'm a huge fan of Sheriff Labrum. He literally answers his phone when you call the sheriff's department himself.
Okay, so the court case.
Yes.
There's an update?
Give us an update since you were on last.
So Aposhian v. Barr, it's docket number 12159, I believe. And it's now, if you type in that docket number, you'll see that the case has been rescheduled. Now, it's been rescheduled about 16 times.
Wow.
My attorneys tell me they have never, ever seen anything go even more than 5 times on a reschedule. We think it was because of the Bruin case, the pending Bruin case, and we think it was because of the pending EPA case, because my case had entanglements in both of those. So what we think is going to happen, because this all came down and there was 2 days left in the term of the 2022 Supreme Court. So what we think is going to happen is they will schedule it for a hearing in September, and they'll then at that point decide not to hear it, but to send it back to the 10th Circuit, affirmatively send it back. So not denied, so that's good. Affirmatively send it back with the new instructions, refer to either the Bruin case or more pointedly, the EPA case for direction. And we think if they use either of those, especially the EPA case, that will win.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. Would you take 20 seconds and tell us what the tie-in is with the EPA case, how that could influence the outcome of your case.
Okay, so it has to do with, and I had to learn this myself. It's a thing called the Chevron doctrine. It comes from a case against Chevron Oil, and it has to do with federal regulations, like administrative rules, that play in part with federal code, which is the actual law. And the federal code or federal regulations are basically written by the agencies like the ATF, the EPA, the FDA, and they are supposed to work alongside and be more specific than federal law, but are not allowed to go beyond what federal law allows or requires. And the Chevron doctrine said, if a code is ambiguous or confusing, something like that, then the agency is allowed to interpret it as it sees fit. If a code isn't confusing or ambiguous, they must apply the exact letter of the code. Well, the ATF has repeatedly said what a machine gun is. And they'd repeatedly said under the Obama administration twice that a bump stock was not specifically and affirmatively a machine gun. No ambiguity there whatsoever. Yet now they're claiming Chevron doctrine because the statute was ambiguous. So we're, anyway, there's a little bit more to it than that, but that's essentially the Chevron doctrine. You can't do. Now, if Congress said we don't like bump stocks, it's Congress's job to write that law and to pass that law, not an agency, an unelected bureaucrat.
Wow,
there's
there's
way
a
too much of that
novel
anyway.
concept. Yeah. Okay,
So
thank
much
you
of
so
that.
much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Hey, no
yet
problem.
again.
It's always fun.
Thanks for the
Have a
insights.
great evening, ladies.
Yes, you as well.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is consistently and chronically a problem. That
Right.
the executive branch wants to be the legislative branch, or the legislative branch frequently intentionally leaves things ambiguous because, then you can't point the finger at them.
Then you can't
So,
point the finger. But I love that we have a Supreme Court that's starting to peel that back a little bit.
Right.
Although, frankly, it is the role of the legislative bodies to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, now we have Senator Kirk Cullimore, who what is your role in the Senate again?
I am the Assistant Majority Whip.
Assistant Majority Whip. Sometimes we shorten both of those names, but I won't say it because this is a family show. And but also you are serving in a unique capacity right now in a somewhat rare circumstance where Utah is filling a vacancy on our Supreme Court. So while we just witnessed this at the federal level and how very high engagement there was and a lot of eyeballs on that, does anybody know that we have a nominee for our Utah Supreme Court? So first of all, educate us on how it even works in Utah, how our judges become judges.
Sure. And just to kind of correct you, this is our second one in the last 2 months.
Yeah. But
Because
it
we had-
doesn't happen often though, but we have had the two back-to-back.
Yep, we've had two back-to-backs. So Utah has the process where any judge, but including Supreme Court justice, is what they call a judicial nominating commission. And it's not unique to Utah. I don't know the exact number of states, but it's more than 25 states, or right around there. About half the states in the union have judicial nomination commissions. So there's 4 different ways that you can have a judge in the United States. You could have a straight governor appointment, which would look very similar to what we do on the federal level, where the president appoints federal judges. You can have them run for a nonpartisan race. So a number of states do that. Some states even have partisan races for judgeships. And then the final way is these nominating commissions. And so a nominating commission in the state of Utah, it's actually established by the Utah Constitution, but the makeup of the nominating commission is per statute. And so these nominating commissions, they have them for each judicial district in the state of Utah. I can't remember off the top of my head how many judicial districts there are, but there's at least 8, I think 9 or more. and they are made up of members from appointed by the Bar Association, from the courts, and then there are some governor appointments and stuff like that. But I wouldn't say frustration, but one of my problems with these is that nobody really knows, in the public, certainly nobody knows who's on these nominating commissions. I'm a practicing attorney, and I don't really know. I look into it when I have to because of my role in the Senate Confirmation Committee. But really, they fly under the radar. There's not a ton of accountability for this. And what they do is they vet all these applicants, and then they give the governor names. And for a district court position, they'll give the governor 5 names, as I recall. And for an appellate court position, they'll give the governor 7 names. And then the governor has to then pick from those names who he will nominate to be the candidate for the available position. So it's good and it's bad. There's a fair amount of transparency because the names are picked by a nominating commission that is supposed to be apolitical. And, then the governor has to pick from those names. And then it goes through the Senate Confirmation Committee. And so once the governor does pick a name, I forgot to mention this, the Senate then has a confirmation committee, which I'm on. We have an opportunity to ask questions and vet the candidate, kind of like you would see on the federal level when the Supreme Court does, it's a big circus and all that. Ours is definitely less of a circus, but we have that same opportunity to vet them and all that.
So quick question for you. When it goes through the nominating committee, when they're making their decisions, is that a public process?
Not really, no.
Yeah, that's kind of a problem too, I feel like.
The candidates I think anybody can basically put forth, that they want to be considered. Mm-hmm. But then they'll meet. You know what, Carolyn, I need to look into this more, but I don't think those meetings are really public meetings where everybody hears the debate of who they're choosing and all that. And, I can see some pluses and minuses for that. Obviously, it's open, transparent meetings is great. But on the other hand, these are people who, if they're not selected, still have to go back to their legal practices and to get vetted in the public could be damaging to their careers potentially.
Yeah, that's true.
So you kind of touched on a couple things there. And I have not loved this process either, the Judicial Nominating Committee process. As you said, the existence of it is in the Constitution, but how the commission is formed is what's put in law. That can be changed. That's movable.
Correct.
But we have this. We just have this habit in Utah with so many boards, commissions, and committees that we want to have like political balance or try to establish some political neutrality and you can end up with bodies that are not really reflective of the state. So you said, having this commission, the idea, the aspiration is that then it's not so partisan. It's not so political. And yet there is absolutely so much about the work of a judiciary that is very political. And we've seen this played out federally, especially. Very, very big issues decided by a court where, a lot of us, on my side of the aisle, we are cheering that court like crazy. On the other side of the aisle, they are, denouncing the court. And yet in our state, we have a system that is supposed to try to mitigate that, but does it really? And can there be this tendency to have people on that commission that do lean politically in one direction?
Yeah, so good questions. From my perspective, there's no doubt that those commissions tend to lean left, if I'm being frank. And there was a Vanderbilt Law Review article a number of years ago that analyzed the different ways that you can become a judge throughout the United States. And one thing I took from that article is that the states that have judicial nominating commissions, the views, the political views, and it's hard to assess this, right? Because most of the time judges are not out there in the political scene. They probably shouldn't be. And may not even be registered with a particular party. And so it's hard to do a total analysis on this, but they determined that the political views of the judiciary most deviated from the public in states where they had judicial nominating commissions.
And that's a problem.
And yeah, I think that's problematic. I mean, I'm an attorney, but just historically, attorneys tend to be a little bit more left of center and tend to drive policy that's a little more left of center. And so with that heavy influence there, and then the court's influence, that's just how it goes sometimes, you know? And so if it was straight governor appointment, the hope would be that the governor would pick people that would have an effect on him politically, right?
Depends on the governor. Depends on the governor.
Depends on the governor, but like we see in presidential campaigns, that could be a stumping point, right? You would vet a governor by saying, who are you going to place on the bench?
Yeah, 100%. And as we go into general election season, and having just left a primary election season, I mean, in presidential years, we are asking that, right? We are looking at frequently at senators and what, when we go to cast our vote for a senator, what might the senator do in that confirmation role? Should they be seated at that time? But we don't do that so much in Utah, and the political piece there really is only at the final end of this. Mm-hmm. So you're getting the person on the stand in front of you is the person who's already gone through all the hoops, and you only get that up and down vote differently than we see on the federal. In the federal process.
And I would be curious what percentage of the time that person is not confirmed once they have jumped through all those hoops. I remember one a few years ago. It's the only time I've ever heard, but I really haven't paid close attention. Do you have any idea what those numbers look like?
It's pretty small. I mean, I've only been at this for 4 years now, but in my recollection, where a judge was nominated and not confirmed by the Senate has only happened one time, and that one time it didn't even come to a vote because it was at the end of Governor Herbert's term, and she was nominated close to the end of the term. His term expired, therefore the Senate could deem that the nomination expired as well, and so Governor Cox came in and was able to pick somebody. So as I recall, I think that's the only time that I'm aware of, at least in the last 4 years.
And could I just say, though, I remember a furor over that, and it seems to me as though the expectation is that the Senate will just rubber stamp anybody who goes through this committee that is made up of people that the public is completely unaware of, whose deliberations do not take place in the open, and then has been approved by the governor. The expectation, it felt to me, from the legal community was that you're just supposed to rubber stamp this as a Senate. Yeah,
I mean, you feel that a little bit, right? Because when they come to the Senate Confirmation Committee, it's already a little bit, congratulatory and all that. And so there is that pressure. I think, with that said, I think we still take our job serious and vet them and talk to them and meet with them. And, as you guys are aware, the Senate is supposed to advise and consent. And so some senators in the past historically, and I know, and I try to have some influence on the advise part before it comes to the consent part as well. And that's not, that's hard to do because you don't know exactly what the governor's doing, and you don't really have a say until the nominating commission puts forth the name.
Yeah. What is the active vehicle for advising the governor on judicial nominees?
So like I said, it's not easy because we don't really know who the names are either until the nominating commission puts forth 5 names or 7 names or whatever it is. And so we can then, I look over those, I review them, I kind of try to call attorneys I know and find out what they think about this person or that person. And then we can say, but the governor is not bound to anything any suggestions we might have or anything like that. But there is there is a window of opportunity to kind of look at the names that are presented. And
so what do you look for? What are you looking for? What are you asking?
Well, you ask a lot about judicial philosophy, and I've talked about this with our recent Supreme Court nominees. It's a little bit different when you're going to be a judge than if you're running for governor or if you're running for legislature. Because when I go to a town hall, people ask me point blank, are you pro-life? How do you feel about the Second Amendment and these types of issues? And you got to be straightforward and you got to answer. And they may like it, they may not like it, but you got to do that. But a judge, that's not really their role. They're not a policymaker. They're not executing policy. And so I don't think it's necessarily fair. Now, would I like to know their position on that? Absolutely. But what I want to hear is what their judicial philosophy is. Are they textualists? How do they interpret statute? Do they defer to legislation, or do they see that as, are they looking for ambiguity and opportunities to create law, and is the Constitution a living and breathing document, or do we go by what the founders intended at the time that it was written? And so those are the type of questions you want to ask to find out, what their philosophy is going to be. Are they going to be true to statute and contract and constitutional principles? So
now this nominee right now, Pullman is did I get that right?
Yep. Judge Jill Pullman.
Judge Pullman comes from the appellate court. Is that correct? So
she's been on the appellate court for 6 years. So
you have state level courts. Some of her rulings, some of her opinions are already out there. So. You're, are you one that reads through her previous rulings and opinions?
Yeah, we go through all it's fortunate, and our last Judge Diana Hagan was on the appellate court too. So it's fortunate when that's the case, because we can look at their body of work and see, okay, what opinions have they drafted? What ones have they agreed to? What ones were potentially overturned by the Supreme Court? And so we review those, we read them, we ask her about specific cases. I would say it's not always as telling as you might think it is, particularly on the appellate court as opposed to Supreme Court, because appellate court is not really creating law. They can create precedents, but usually that's reserved for the Supreme Court, and at least in the state of Utah. And so, you can ask questions like, why it seems like you deviated from the law here. Why did you get overturned or something like that? But even being on the court for 6 years, as I recall, I think she had maybe 3 or 4 cases that were reviewed and remanded or something by the Supreme Court. And we asked her about all of those. And frankly, she had really good answers for all of them.
So this is such an important role. And I think there are going to be some pretty big cases that come before our state Supreme Court pretty soon. I mean, we saw the federal Supreme Court send a big case back to states, and we'll see some movement on things like that. So it's every bit as important that we're paying attention to this process, just like we do with the federal government, and that we do review our candidates for elected office in the Senate in particular, understanding that they have this role. Yeah. And I don't know that we think about that too much.
No, and our governor.
Right.
Yeah. I would love, even attorneys, we might hear from 1, 2, 3 attorneys on any given nomination process, which is a little bit crazy to me, because who would know better about these judges than colleagues and people who've been before them and all of that? And so, I don't want to say I'm disappointed, but it's a little bit shocking to me that there's not more input from the legal community.
Okay, so that is surprising. On the other side of this, though, the people do have a little bit of a voice on some of the judges, and what impact does that have? I mean, that is probably the most skipped over thing on every ballot, is that judicial retention piece. Right. And
for every one of us.
Yep. I asked the judges how they feel about retention elections, and as you might expect, they say, hey, we think it's a good check on the judiciary. I don't know that I completely agree with that, because maybe it's not quite as rare as a nominee not getting through the advise and consent process, but it's pretty dang rare that somebody is not retained. And usually they have to have done something pretty egregious that makes the news. Mm-hmm. Now, the judiciary will tell you that the retention process works because we've got JPEC, the Judicial Performance Evaluation Committee, that reviews all the judges when they're coming up for retention and assesses them and looks at performance and looks at attorney critiques and other judge critiques. And based on those reviews, they say that is a vetting method that will kind of work itself out, because if somebody doesn't get good reviews, then they may decide to not go for retention. And so they might not even be on the ballot if they didn't get decent reviews, or if there's problems with colleagues or something like that. So from behind the scenes, they say it's a good check. I'm still not super convinced because, nobody knows what they're voting for on retention elections. Mm-hmm. I know with my office, we practice across the state. So I feel like I have a pretty good idea. And when people ask me, I'll give them my 2 cents, even though what's interesting is by ethics rules, attorneys are precluded from campaigning for or against a judge. And so I'm not really out there campaigning, but if somebody asks me specifically about a judge, I might say this or that. But so the people who know the most aren't even really out there publicizing it, and so the public, I don't know how they would know. We passed a law a year or two ago, Kim, you might recall, that puts the JPEG score on the ballot. Mm-hmm. So it'll be like a little bit of information, but again, I know what the JPEG scores mean, and it still doesn't mean all that much for me. So well, I'm not convinced it's a lot.
I just wonder if attorneys were campaigning, when it comes right down to it, no one trusts you guys anyway. So they figure, I'm just kidding, Senator.
Well, that's probably fair, though. If certain attorneys were campaigning against a judge, a lot of the public might be like, "Oh, that's somebody we like."
That's true. It depends on who the attorneys are, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your work that you do on that, and this is a big responsibility. So do a good job, Senator. Give us a good Supreme Court justice. So
we're always looking. I opened a bill my first year in the legislature to redo the makeup of the judicial nomination commissions, and I got steamrolled on that.
Because there were a lot of attorneys that.
Well, I was a new legislature, didn't do my homework. I just opened the bill and ran with it without talking to anybody, and I got a little bit of pushback. So with that said, we're still looking at that, but now we're trying to bring people along, and say, okay, what can we do to make some improvements? Because constitutional change is probably not likely to get rid of the nominating commissions altogether if that's what we want to do. But changing the process and tweaking it a little bit by statute, there's probably some appropriate tweaks that we could make.
Great.
Nice. Well, thanks. Glad that you're there doing the work.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you
Thanks
so much
for joining us.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Well,
yeah,
that's happening right now. So, that just happened this week. So pay attention to those hearings.
And let me just say, I think that we've talked about this a lot. There's becoming a greater and greater recognition that more needs to happen at the state and local level, that we need to stop relying on the federal government for things that the federal government was never formed to do. Right. And it seems like this is probably one more of those areas we ought to be paying as much attention to our state Supreme Court justices and other judges within the state as we pay to our federal Supreme Court.
Well, and this is another one of those areas where the left and Democrats have really kind of taken over some institutional things, including the courts. So if we had a commission that was made up and reflective of the state and the state sort of political makeup, if it was a match, then we'd have a conservative court. We'd see different things. But so there has been a movement across the country and has been very successful to establish these judicial nominating committees, because they will then lead it more left, and you end up with a little bit more left of whatever court. Which, I mean, there's an argument that should the judiciary be so political, but it is.
Shouldn't be, but it is.
But it is.
Yes.
And then when you add to that some of the other, law enforcement side of our institutions that have also just gone to places that we almost don't recognize as a society anymore. But another follow-up initiative to that were things like redistricting and things like that.
Well, I was just going to say, the Commission for Redistricting was the exact same thing, and it was a national drive in red states.
And it just sounds good. Let's have a commission made up of lots of people and appointed by this and that.
People.
So they're going to kumbaya, and that's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And
Not
we'll have
those
a balance.
Not those people we elect.
Right,
the people who are elected and trusted by their local communities, not them.
You know what? I want to point to the governor and say, this is your court. If there's a decision that comes down that we disagree with, we go to him and we say, this is your court. But,
because
he can just say, well, you know what? It's not, I just
picked the best of what I was given.
Yeah. So, that's not great.
No.
All right. Let's thank our producer, Fosmu.
I'm glad there's not a test.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. You know what? It is your turn to close.
No,
but
ahead,
I will. Follow us, share, like us, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, next we have Heather Cullimore's husband.
That's how I introduced myself at convention.
We have Cullimore's. Because Heather's pretty famous. So, I mean, she's social media famous. Okay.